In terms of systemic racism in Canada, it's my opinion that the settler colonial system relies on the dehumanization of Indigenous people. The way that works is that in order for settler colonialism as a system, and that's the system we live in Canada, to exist, you have to kind of systematically erase Indigenous people. Now, they've tried to do that physically, but the other way that they've also tried to do that is to take away our humanity. So we've been sort of systematically prevented from telling our own stories and talking about our ways and how we do things. And oftentimes those stories have been either appropriated or told by someone who's not Indigenous. In terms of the dehumanization of Indigenous people, that works on a variety of levels in Canadian society. So when you prevent people from being able to tell their own stories, you can then inject whatever narrative it is that you want, and people will believe it because they're not hearing any kind of other counter-narrative. In Canada, that narrative has been that Indigenous people are wards of the state, that we receive handouts from the government, that we are like, you know, all of the bad stereotypes. We are alcoholics, we are more prone to violence. These things are not statistically true. And it also relies on a kind of erasure of the colonial legacy of Canada. So what's happening is you're believing these things but never considering, well, what are the reasons for that? Why is there a higher representation of Aboriginal people in the homeless population of Toronto? Why? Well, we can think about residential schools. We can think about the 60s scoop. We can think about land dispossession. We can think about the number of people who've been disenfranchised from their communities for a variety of reasons. Those are things that kind of narrative is not often told in the media. I personally think that trajectory is sort of changing. I think the more time goes on, the more power Indigenous people have to tell their own stories. You know, the more media we have of our own, the more higher profile people speaking about these things and telling the truth, the more change happens. But for a very long time, we weren't allowed to tell our stories. The acclaimed author, Lee Maracle, tells a story about the first book she ever published. Now, this is a woman who was one of the first Aboriginal people to ever be published in Canada, one of the first Aboriginal people to ever go to university. You know, she's a great seminal author she won the Premier's Award in 2014. She tells a story about when she went to publish her first book. She brought it to a publisher. They looked at it. They said, "This is fantastic, but we're not going to publish it." And she said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Because Indians don't read." So she actually had to go out and get, she tells the story, she had to go out and get signatories, like people to sign a petition, and she got 800 people to sign a petition saying they would buy the book if it was published.